alone in your room, take it as easy as you can. Everybody gets a little impatient. Don't let that bother you.
Hello everybody, welcome back to Screenstars. I'm here today to bring you my review for the 2022 horror film Bed Rest, a film that is written and directed by Laurie Evans Taylor, and it stars Melissa Barrier and Guy Burnett. Now the film focuses on a married couple, Julie and Daniel, who move into a new house that needs an awful lot of renovation. However, it's a house that certainly she fell in love with, and she's heavily pregnant at the same time. Now, whilst she's heavily pregnant, she suffers a fall and she gets taken to hospital. Luckily, the baby is okay, but she's ordered to take bed rest for the final 8 weeks of her pregnancy. And then when this begins, the bed rest, there is a discovery by her that there may be a sinister force within the house that has taken unnatural interest in her and her unborn child. Right. What are my thoughts on Bed Rest? Well, initially, this is one of those horror films that upon first glance and maybe the first half an hour of watching, you kind of feel like this is going to be like a pretty generic, like haunted house film. And you could certainly argue that that's what it is. But this film actually managed to maintain and engage me throughout its runtime. There was more than a couple of times in the first 30 minutes where I kind of rolled my eyes a little bit because it had a few cheap jump scares that, like the old-fashioned cheap jump scares that we used to get in movies all the time about a decade ago. You know, we even get a jump scare with a cat, for God's sake. You know what I mean? I thought those days were behind us. So my first impressions of the film weren't brilliant, but I thought the premise was excellent. You know, the idea of this heavily pregnant woman who is so desperate with her husband to keep this child safe because they suffered a tragedy a couple of years previously, or the last pregnancy, where the baby was died during birth. So they've had a real tragedy, and this led to like some serious mental health issues for her. But she's fully recovered now. She's got this pregnancy, has this fall, so she has to bed rest for the final 8 weeks. And then she's in this predicament where she can't do a lot, and the house kind of comes for her, sort of thing, or what you believe are like spirits. It's presented like that there's these spirits that are coming for her. Initially, she thinks she might be hallucinating because of the hormones or whatever, and others refuse to believe her because of her history with mental health problems, when she refused to accept the death of her first child and struggled with that. So she has past history of like having hallucinations and things like that. So her husband doesn't believe her. Nobody believes her when she claims that she's seeing these things that she's seeing within the house. And then the clever thing about the film is, I think anyway, is you start questioning it. You start thinking, well, actually, is she suffering with mental health problems? Because all the signs are there and the history is there, so on and so forth. It could very well be that she is imagining all this sort of stuff. It could be all in her head, because she's seeing like this little boy in this house. And this little boy presents itself of about 5 years old, I think. And I think it was about 5 years previously when she lost her first child. So she assumes that that's her first child, 5 years later, sort of thing. So she's desperate to kind of try and communicate with this spirit and all this kind of stuff, thinking it's her son that died. So you've got all this stuff going off, and you've got the husband getting more and more frustrated because he's worried about her and the safety of their unborn child. There's like a housekeeper stroke nurse that's living with her so the husband can work. And it kind of presents another storyline there. There's this serious distrust of her because Julie just doesn't trust her. She thinks there might be something sinister from her. And then you start questioning that. So the film is pretty clever on kind of keeping you guessing until it doesn't, until the climax of the film happens, and it's pretty, I'd say impressive. You know what I mean? I wouldn't call it terrifying or anything, but There were some tense moments in the last 20-25 minutes. It was an impressive climax, I think, for the film, and it kind of leaves you on a little bit of a high, even if it does get a little bit melodramatic here and there at the end of the film. So I thought this film kind of played around with a few kind of ideas and thoughts, you know what I mean? You had the mental health stuff potentially going on. You had other stuff going on in the film that you just necessarily didn't trust. And then the film reveals everything that's going on, and then you feel fairly impressed with what you're getting. So I actually wasn't too unimpressed with this, and I thought for what it was, for what it presented as like a fairly standard haunted house film within the first 30 minutes, it actually turned out to be fairly engaging and interesting, and certainly with good performances. I thought the performances by the two leads were of a really high standard. I thought they had good chemistry together. And it's one of those films where there's very few people in it. For the majority of the runtime, you just really get the husband and the wife, and then the nurse stroke housekeeper further on. So I think this is worth checking out if you're interested. If any of the premise sounds interesting to you, give it a go. Bed Rest. I've given it a 6 out of 10 because I thought it was pretty good. So thank you very much for watching, guys. I hope you enjoyed the review. I'll be back with more reviews and content on the channel very, very soon.